Hello all, I hope you're doing well today. Many of you will know I'm very eager to re-implement the energy of the father, and I believe that needs to happen in three dimensions. The practical, physical dimension. I believe fathers are needed in the home. We all need elders, even as men, to look up to guide us. I also think we need father culture. This is why I speak about tradition a lot. That's almost the boundaries that give us structure in our society. When you're young, you tend to want to destroy boundaries. That's somewhat natural to an extent. The issue with the modern West is it's become very feminized and promoted that youthful rebellion as almost the commonsensical approach. As I often say, it describes established masculinity as either tyrannical or toxic. What this means is we destroy our boundaries, we destroy our tradition. And you only realize how dangerous that is when you get older. And you're like, oh, I see now why so many young men get mixed up in drugs and die and just can't figure themselves out and have all these mental health challenges. They don't know structure, they don't know safety. And again, like I say, when you're young, you can't foresee what's going to happen in life when you rip down boundaries. And like I say, in a sense, it's normal part of youth, but as we really mature, the idea is we rebel and then we come back home like the prodigal son. And then we almost become the bastions of tradition ourselves because we're fully integrated, but it's an evolved tradition. We understand the wisdom of our father, but introduce it into a new age. Symbolically speaking, of course. So my point here in this video is with this father energy removed, we have to understand what's happened to us and what's happened to our culture in the Western world, spiritually, culturally, personally. There's a lovely phrase from the men's writer, Robert Bly, which goes something like, in the whole of the absent father, demons can enter. And it's a very insightful phrase, this. It's in his book, Iron John, an absolute classic, if you haven't heard it before. Now, obviously, we can understand this in multiple different ways. In literal ways, for instance, there was one of these viral clips that went round, I think it was Instagram, not so long back, and it had this paedophile, and he basically, was trying to turn his life around, and someone was interviewing him and saying, well, who would you pick on, basically, or what kids? And he always said it was the fatherless ones, because there was no one to protect them. You could manipulate the mothers. And that's a very obvious example of what happens when you don't have the love of the father, the defense of the father, a particularly brutal example. But of course, there's other factors in how that works as well. I gestured to one earlier in terms of just youngsters going out and getting involved in all sorts of dangerous environments that they otherwise wouldn't had the father been there to hold them off a bit. Drugs is a big one in this day and age. A lot of fathers aren't in homes. There's no one to stop them taking drugs. They're not going to listen to mum. And, cannabis becomes the gateway to whatever else. Or cannabis itself can wreak havoc on a young teenage mind. Certainly didn't help me. And the point is that it's not that the father will completely stop that behaviour, but he'll definitely make it harder for the son. He'll definitely make him think twice. And if he gets caught, he'll know about it. So the point is, the father is a defence mechanism from outside threats, but also threats that can come in, such as the kid can involve himself in. Now, a big problem as well of having a distant father, whether that's literally your parents have divorced or your father abandoned you, or even, this is one people forget, your father doesn't know his own role, which is very common in the post-boomer era. The boomers sort of moved away from tradition, so the father's role became more about earning the money. And, the mother mothered the children, and the father thought, well, I take them to the football at the weekend and that's all I have to do. Well, what you found is that a lot of young males end up not having the initiatory experience of being dragged away from the mother, which is painful but normal. And it usually happens around the early teens. Bar mitzvahs are a good example of that in the Jewish tradition, of course. It's when they come to teenagehood, they're pulled away. This is quite common around all sorts of different cultures. I'm just using bar mitzvah because it's one that people will understand in this day and age where they've been largely eradicated. But the idea is you do learn to move away from the mother, and there is a wisdom in that because the young male must develop his own nervous system. He must develop his own ways of dealing with life. And that's where he enters the world of men. And ideally, that's where his father is to guide him. But how many young men have that experience now? I'd say, 25% if you're lucky. I mean, maybe there are some fathers who introduce their sons to boxing, they take them out to sports clubs, and they're there and they're pushing them through and saying, son, you've got to go through the challenge. I know it's hard. You know, maybe you've been on the sports field and you got absolutely walloped by some kid 10 times the size of you. I know it hurts, son. We've got to dust it down. We've got to carry on and move on. Work through the pain. Learn to deal with it. This doesn't happen, and it's even seen as toxic, again, by the feminine mainstream. It goes without saying, of course, there can be a toxic side to it. It's not about brutalizing your son and just seeing him go through hell and laughing. It's about lovingly guiding him through challenge. And masculine fatherly love isn't smoochy woochy, oh, poor little baby, come here and have a cuddle. It's you can do it, son. Dust yourself down. I'll help you get through this. It's that, you know. But this doesn't happen anymore. You know, I've been through this many times. And the problem is that it means that the boy's nervous system doesn't really move away from the energy of the mother. And this is especially bad when the son sees the mother in peril, because the son starts to see it as his duty to maintain his mother's emotional state. This is especially common in families who've had divorce, because the son starts to see it as his role to be the man of the house intuitively. But he's not ready for that role. His nervous system hasn't developed. He's not spiritually mature enough to deal with that. So he ends up with this sort of overburdened sense of responsibility in a world he can't handle. I actually had to deal with quite a bit of this. I came from a divorced home, lots of mess and violence, and I couldn't deal with it. So it became a way of me questioning myself of just, I can't deal with life. That's what it turned into for me in my later teens. Led to lots of panic attacks and fear and things. So I had to work through it and realize, actually, I can deal with life. It's just I was whacked around the face with a cricket bat, metaphorically speaking, although only slightly metaphorically. And I was just, you know, when you're so young and things like that happen, you just don't know how to deal with life. It's hard. But my point is here, is that so many young males adopt the feminine instincts of the mother without knowing so. And this is very common in this day and age. Now, again, we can go back to these 3 dimensions. Literally, in terms of trying to protect the mother, read where problems can be in the world, you know, make her feel better when she's sad. This is extremely common in modern families. The other one is culturally. You know, instead of pushing through the emotional upset of the age, we start being very careful about what people think and feel. This is especially bad in England. You know, I had an Irish friend once who called it the constipation of the English middle classes, and I knew exactly what he meant. He's like, oh, whoopsie, I didn't mean to offend. It's all this sort of stuff, like gently. And it's sort of tied in this feminine concern, you know. And again, it goes without saying, there is space for kindness of others. It's not about being nasty, but there's also a counter damage that's done when we're all so careful not to offend anyone. You know, we're not speaking truly, we're not being our authentic selves, and that's a cultural influence of the feminine force on the masculine. But also, on a more spiritual sense, we really do get lost in the mind and the emotions within. And we just don't know there's a difference between the mind and the emotions. Now, a good example of how this plays out is something that happened in my family recently. So, as you know, I'm obviously very much involved in this work. I'm not making out I'm perfect, still have my challenges, but I've definitely come a long way. I mean, the guy I was 15 years ago, I mean, I was a mess. I really was. I mean, I just couldn't tell my arse from my elbow, didn't know how to get on in life, really was in a bad way. And I was weird as well. I remember that Doors song, People Are Strange When You're a Stranger, and I used to really identify with it. But I really worked through it and became, quote, normal, if you like, or at least normal seeming to the world. And I started to realise, I've really been on this journey, and I can see why so many men are lost. They're stuck in this place. And to give you a practical example, my wife is terrified of spiders, which, you know, lots of women are, some men are and all that. But the point is, I was out with my son. He said, you got to come home. There's this giant spider and I'm scared of it and I don't want it to run away. So I took my son home, and by the time we got there, you know, the spider had ran away. But my wife was freaking out. You know, where's it gone? The spider's watching me, all this stuff. And I immediately was thinking about my son, because I'm thinking he's only a little boy, but he's going to be looking at his mother thinking, Mummy's upset about something. So He's feeding off his mother's nervous system at this point. And it's my job to really take him away from that when he gets to his young teens or even earlier. But at this point, it became very clear that my role as the father is to provide the stable nervous system which passes down to him through my wife. So this is why we do the work. Not because we want to be perfect, not because we're going to be like I'm better than everybody else, but to try and create that inner balance. And if I'm completely honest, I'm still not great with spiders, I will put them in a glass and take them outside, but I don't really like holding the big ones, I'll do it if I have to, but I'd rather not. But the point is, in this instant, it's really up to me to maintain calm because the spider's gone and my wife is freaking out a bit. So it's up to me to try and calm her nervous system by my own stillness. And of course, in the grand scheme of things, that's going to make her feel more comfortable in me as her husband. No more because she thinks he can deal with it and he's making me feel better about this situation. So I'm telling her, look, the spider's more scared of you than you're of it. Honestly, it's ran a mile at this point. He's just a little Spidey pants, trying to sort of cartoonize him. And he's no harm, this sort of thing. And slowly she calms down, which of course my son feeds off that. Because I don't want my son growing up terrified of spiders. I'd rather him think a bit like me. It's all right to have fear, but you can handle it, is what we're going for. You can manage a nervous system. But of course, this is a practical example of how this interbalance between the masculine, the feminine, the nervous system and the children should ideally work. But if you remove that and the father's not there, imagine what happens. Wife's freaking out, son's freaking out. Where's the spider? They're not going to sleep that night. The son's traumatized, carries that through. So the point I'm making here, and this is a big thing actually, I'm doing the 7 steps, the group work I do at the moment with a bunch of guys, fantastic bunch of guys actually, all really investing in the work, which is really good to see. And one part we're at in the work right now, the aim of this and what I'm saying in this video and to them in obviously a deeper context, we're never trying to chase away this fear in the world or fear inside of ourselves. It's always going to be there. The feminine instinct is always going to be there to an extent in the masculine. That's why in the yin and yang you have a dot of each colour in the other. There's a dot of yin in the yang and a dot of yang in the yin. Carl Jung will call that the anima and animus. And what the point I'm making here is we're not chasing anything away. If you feel fear in your day-to-day life, that's all right. It's all right. The problem is how we react to that fear or that concern or that anger. I think it was Aquinas who said, those who, get lost in the emotions, there's an effeminate quality to it because we're dominated by these emotions. The masculine approach to it isn't to deny these things. It's a immature masculine side to be like, that F fear and things like that. I forget the phrase, but there was some phrase that used to go around in the 90s. Maybe it was just FC UK fear. Maybe that's all it was. But the point is that's not realistic. You have fear for a reason. It's because you have a nervous system, you have a capacity to think and read things through. You can work with that or you can be eaten alive by it. And some people are going to be higher in that capacity. I'm higher in that capacity because of my early life experiences, sensitive soul and so on. But the point is you can work with it or it can eat you alive. And the point is that I'm trying to get to here is we have to move back to the Father in a spiritual sense, which is being still and recognizing the noise of the world around us. Now, when I say being still, it almost implies there's something we have to do in order to be still. But we don't. And again, I can't really explain this too deeply in a video, but this is why we do this deep work with the rituals. It's because it introduces us to what that stillness is. And you realize it pre-exists. In religious language, that's the eternal love of God the Father. Unmoved, still, impenetrable. It's the ultimate. And it's a simple recognition of letting this recognizing be. So when the fear comes internally or when you see it in the world, in your wife or whatever else it is, even if you are scared, in terms of your body or in your mind, it's still that deeper resonance beneath which recognizes that fear that we're looking for. If we can recognize that, the more we start to do that, the more we start to create that gap of space, that sunlight comes in and frees us from the hell of our emotions. Now, why it's so important we do this ourselves is because, number one, it's the deep spiritual recognition of the deep I, the real I. When I say I mean like the I am, lovely phrase in the Bible, I am that I am, the recognition of being itself within. But it's also like an eye itself that sees. There is just a natural seeing at the core of ourselves, which is objective. That's almost like the God eye, if you will. And that is the Father in the spiritual language. This isn't some mystical, weird thing that you need to spend 10 years on a mountain figuring out. It's here and now. And it's a simple melting into that recognition. Now, this once was at the very heart of our tradition, which would then pass through into our cultural norms, down into the family, down into the daily life, the three fathers. Obviously, it's gone now, but it's still right here, dormant, waiting for you to recognize it. And then as we start to work through this, it becomes clearer and clearer how lost we've been, And as I said to the guys doing the work at the moment, it's all right if you get lost every now and again. If you get lost in your mind, lost in an anger, lost in a fear. The point is that you recognize you were lost. And you're like, oh man, I've been in my head for like 3 hours. I got kidnapped by a mind attack, or lost in my emotions, or having this imaginary argument in my head. It's all right. We're human beings. We're fallen. The role of establishing the masculine mature spirituality is in the recognition, and coming back to it more and more. And it's the more you do it, it becomes intuitive. So the idea here is that we have to plug that hole through which demons can enter spiritually, culturally with the tradition, and in the home as fathers. Now, of course, it goes without saying, for many of us, it's too late. We had a hard time growing up. But this is where we need to seek the elder now. The elders around us who can offer us that guidance, who can give us that stability, they are out there. Might take a couple of years of searching, as for me, but you do find them. We have to do the work on fathering ourselves as well. And ultimately, as we start doing more of the work, one of the most healing things to heal our own issues with the absent father is to become a father. Now, I'm not saying we do that when we're at the peak of being traumatized, but as we start to work through it a bit and find our feet, becoming a father is very, very influential because it shows us how difficult it was for our own fathers. It's not easy to be a father. It's easy to make mistakes, And then we recognize, if you will, the demand we were putting on our father, if you like, was almost trying to treat our father like a god in a world where we turned our back on God. So you realize the mess of Western modernity then. Really what you want is all those three fathers implemented strongly, blocking those demons out. Unfortunately, the demons are in Western culture and inside of us now. But if you turn to this, you have recourse. You really do. You can find your way through this. And in my eyes, it can lead to a deep reawakening in the West that needs to happen. Not just to save the culture, but even ourselves. It starts with our souls, Not about being perfect, but it's about having an aptitude to turn back to the light and come home away from the hell of the emotions, the noise, and the feminine soul, which we're just not meant to be. We're meant to protect and love the feminine, not become it. I hope this helps somebody out there. If you are interested in the 7-step work, I will try and do it again by the end of the year. No guarantees. It depends on how much time I've got. But do let me know if you're interested to have an idea of numbers. Other than that, do join the Substack. Of course, you can connect with me exclusively, join the one-on-one calls and so on. And, group calls, not one-on-one calls. Other than that, do subscribe to this channel. Enjoy the rest of your day, friends.